Growing up, I was never really a fan of Donkey Kong. He just never really appealed to me. A big gorilla who throws barrels and likes bananas, ooh, fun. One of the few Nintendo IP whose wavelengths I could just never really seem to get on. And even though I would play Link to the Past, Super Mario World, or even Tiny Toon Adventures on my Super Nintendo until my thumbs bled, and all of my time spent with the console, I never even touched Donkey Kong Country. Now obviously, little Stoney was an uncultured moron who didn't know shit about shit. And so I was actually well into adulthood by the time I finally got around to playing Donkey Kong Country for the first time. And I can honestly say that not playing it sooner has become one of the great regrets of my life. And I say that with no hyperbole. Maybe a little hyperbole. But for real, this was like having the GameCube and never playing Luigi's Mansion. This was like having the Genesis and never playing Sonic and Knuckles, you feel me? What kind of person would I be today if I had had the sense to play DKC as a child? What might I have accomplished? How high might I have climbed? Sadly, we may never know. But what we do know is that Donkey Kong Country is a tentpole of 2D platforming, and it's endured and inspired, echoing through the decades since its release, its influence still reverberating through the industry to this day like a gong ringing through a Tibetan monastery. That's right, if you don't want to hear me gush about Donkey Kong Country for 15 minutes, there's the door. But for those of you hanging around, don't forget to pass to the left as we take a hazy look back at Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo. Over in foggy London town, Chris and Tim Stamper were having great success with their brand new studio, Rare. The brothers founded Rare in 1985 and were backed by a pretty hefty check from Nintendo, an investment that, as we all know, would end up paying off in dividends for the company. Rare spent most of their early years developing successful titles for the NES, the most notable probably being Battletoads in '91. But as it turned out, this was just a warm-up act for the studio. They had something much, much bigger on their horizon, and by the time '93 came around, a game would be developed that would change everything. And that game was Aladdin for the Sega Genesis. Holy fuck, look at those graphics. What, did Disney themselves work on this title? They did? Am I actually just watching Aladdin on VHS right now? I don't even know. I can't tell. How am I? Nintendo's backs were against the wall. What were they going to do? The Genesis' stunning visuals and stellar library had already taken a huge bite out of the home console market. And now they drop this masterpiece? Oh my God. And I know it sounds like I'm doing a bit here, but seriously. Donkey Kong Country never would have happened if Nintendo didn't enlist Rare in the development of a game specifically to rival the graphics of Aladdin on the Sega Genesis. You see, Nintendo weren't dummies. They chose Rare for a reason. Not only had they been a solid developer for Nintendo throughout the mid-'80s and early '90s, but Rare had also recently purchased Silicon Graphics, whose tech would allow the studio to render 3D models in an attempt to prepare for the forthcoming N64 that was in development. However, Rare soon found that they could both render and compress these models to the point that they could be used as 16-bit SNES sprites while still managing to look damn good. If it was graphics Nintendo wanted, it was graphics Nintendo was gonna get. Now, the only question that remained was what portrait to paint on this new canvas. It was decided that for this endeavor, Rare were going to be handed the reins to the Donkey Kong franchise. And that might sound like a bigger deal today than it really was back then. You gotta remember, much of the esteem Donkey Kong carries these days is due primarily to Rare. When Rare began development on the DKC project, Donkey Kong had pretty much been dead for almost a decade. '94 was going to be DK's big revival, a classic-style Game Boy title in June, followed by a big shiny new console reimagining just in time for the holidays, complete with cutting-edge graphics technology. Best case, Rare completely revitalizes Donkey Kong. It becomes a smash hit, sells millions of copies, and reestablishes the SNES as the superior console for the remainder of the generation. Worst case, the game flops, and Donkey Kong quietly goes back to retirement, leaving Rare disgraced in the eyes of Nintendo and the gaming public. No pressure, Rare. The fact of the matter is, this was a very low-risk, high-reward scenario for Nintendo. It's not like they were having Rare develop the next Mario title here. In fact, Nintendo seemed to almost intentionally distance themselves from this project. Usually known for being heavily involved in anything remotely related to their IP, Nintendo was very hands-off in this game's development, leaving the ball primarily in Rare's court. This was actually the first Donkey Kong game Miyamoto himself didn't direct, although he would provide important insight throughout the development. It's possible possible Nintendo just didn't have ironclad faith in Rare, and were ensuring that they were fully poised to claim deniability should the game have been deemed a stinker. But for Rare, this was their big shot. They were going to bring the heat. They had big ambitions for this game and for the future of their studio. If these guys ever wanted to someday produce their dream project, Kinect Sports Rivals, they were going to have to pull this shit off. And, well, the results speak for themselves. 9.3 million units sold, and Donkey Kong Country remains to this day the highest selling game in the Donkey Kong franchise. It received awards, accolades, universal acclaim from critics and consumers, and was considered by many to be a pivotal moment in gaming history. Yes, Rare succeeded in what they set out to do and had successfully set a new standard with which other developers would now have to compete. But how did this happen? What made this game so great? Was it really just the graphics? Anybody who's played Kingdom Hearts 3 can tell you that good graphics do not equate to a good game. No, I can tell you right now that this game didn't reach the heights it did just because Donkey Kong can do this. Although, admittedly, that was a pretty big part of it. No, this game had it all. Smooth gameplay, incredible level design, and amazingly, it managed to somehow sound just as great as it looked. David Wise was the primary composer on Donkey Kong Country. This man was channeling Donkey Kong through every fiber of his being as he laid down track after mind-blowing track for this game. His original task was to create 3 demo tracks with a jungle theming. That's it. Which Wise did. And those 3 tracks would be combined to become the DK Island Swing we know today, the song that would set the tone for the entire game. After this work of genius, Wise was obviously offered the chance to score the whole Donkey Kong Country project. Wise had a fantastic grasp on the atmosphere that Rare was trying to build with this game. Every single track oozes ambiance. Whether you're running through an abandoned mine or swimming through a coral reef, the music will make you feel that. It will take you there. Wise's heavy use of percussion and environmental sound effects combined with these catchy tunes resulted in a soundtrack that was unlike any on the market at the time. You're not confusing a song from Donkey Kong Country with a song from Super Mario World, you feel me? It was so unique, so subtle yet impactful, and matched the vibe of the game so unbelievably well. And paired with Rare's stunning visuals, this created an immersive experience you simply couldn't get anywhere else at the time. And the gameplay, Jesus Christ! The controls are tight. Both Donkey Kong and Diddy are responsive, snappy, and allow for quick reactions to most hazards and enemies, assuming they don't catch you in midair. Each character really feels distinct in their movement, too. Whenever you swap from DK to Diddy or vice versa, you'll immediately feel the subtle yet crucial differences in how each controls. Donkey Kong is slower and can't jump quite as high or far as Diddy, but he hits like a tank. He can knock out enemies that tiny little Diddy will just bounce right off of. This makes DK perfect for enemy-heavy sections and bosses. Likewise, Diddy's increased agility makes him perfect for secret hunting, reaching golden statues, extra lives, and hidden areas. I honestly tend to not like buddy systems in my 2D platformers. My ADHD brain usually just finds the other sprite running alongside me to be distracting and unnecessary. Like, why are you here? I can do this myself. But for some reason, I don't find this to be the case with Donkey Kong Country. And I think a big part of why that was Rare's genius choice to use the partner character as the player's health bar. If you're speeding through the level as Diddy and you get hit, Diddy's going away, and you're left as Donkey Kong until you can find another buddy barrel. The inverse, of course, is also true. Get hit as DK and you're stuck as Diddy. Get hit again as either Kong and it's game over, Rover. In my mind, this ties the idea of having my buddy with me to security. Having them there isn't annoying, it's comforting. I'm not relieved when my buddy disappears. I'm actively searching for another buddy barrel so that I can use Diddy's life force as a buffer between me and the icy chill of death's embrace. And that's what friends are for, right? This system has the added benefit of ensuring the player can't just use their favorite Kong throughout the entire game. If you're used to playing as DK and take a hit, you'll have to play as Diddy until DK can be recovered, simultaneously forcing the player out of their comfort zone and acquainting them with the other characters character's playstyle as they traverse the level with their non-dominant Kong. And trust me, you'll be taking hits. This game is one of the best, most steady difficulty curves I've ever experienced in a 2D platformer. Each time you do a barrel cannon section, it'll get a little harder, a little more complex. Your enemies will get bigger and more armored the closer you get to K. Rool's ship. With each minecart section you do, you will incrementally take more and more years off of your life. I love this type of Zelda-esque difficulty progression in my games, introducing simple mechanics and ideas and then continuing to complicate and build upon them naturally throughout the course of the game until they become legitimate challenges. And believe me, this game is a legitimate challenge. But what I like about this type of difficulty progression is that it really promotes the mastering of a game and its mechanics, making the player feel good, like they earned their win through their blood, sweat, and tears. And this is a feeling that I get from Donkey Kong Country in spades, way more than other games of its time. If I did have one gripe difficulty-wise, I will say I've noticed that the hitboxes are definitely skewed in the player's favor. There were a few moments when I was 100% sure Kremling had pulled off a higher jump, rising above me, only to watch him fall off the screen as if I jumped on his head. While this did cause me to double take a bit, it really didn't happen often enough to be considered cheap, and honestly it only happened in sections where I was actually pretty grateful for the second chance, so no harm, no foul, I guess. Traversing DK Island is an absolute blast. Every area is distinctive, with memorable levels packed with both top-shelf platforming as well as tons of secrets and collectibles that keep multiple playthroughs fresh and exciting. Donkey Kong is a little girlfriend, and she saves your game for you. Funky Kong owns his own airline, and he can fast travel you all over the island, which really helps when you're going for 100% completion. DK, I can't keep flying you and Diddy for free like this, man. Do you have any idea what jet fuel prices are at right now, man? I'm in way over my head on this airline, DK. COVID hit us bad. We haven't been able to. Cranky Kong is hilarious and legitimately made me laugh a couple times with his one-liners. And I'll also give you helpful hints about the locations of hidden areas and collectibles. The game's story centers around Donkey Kong being pissed off because K. Rool stole all of his bananas, so we're going to fuck him up and get him back. And that's it. That's the game. God, I miss those days. Like many 2D platformers, DKC tells the bulk of its narrative through gameplay and subtext. What starts as an adventure to reclaim bananas becomes a little more weighty as the player progresses through the game, and they see that the effects of the Kremling invasion goes beyond a pile of stolen produce. Environments go from colorful and lush to mechanical and dark. Beautiful jungles and coasts give way to the Kremling's factories and toxic waste fields. This instills in the player the intrinsic motivation to protect the beauty of DK Island they've come to appreciate through the game's stunning visuals and memorable cast of characters. And I have to give Rare credit where credit is due. It's hard to tell a compelling story on the hardware developers were working with back then, and it was this kind of narrative polish that really separated the true classics with the mountain of forgettable 2D platformers of the 90s. Honestly, what else can be said about Donkey Kong Country? It's a masterpiece. It's a game that anyone who calls themselves a gamer should experience at least once. Iconic doesn't even begin to describe the status of Donkey Kong Country. It is so acclaimed, so revered, so respected, and it lives up to absolutely every ounce of its own prestige. It's a timeless classic that can be enjoyed by any generation, and if you haven't played Donkey Kong Country yet, go play that shit right now or I'm gonna throw a barrel, hit you right in the kidneys.